Welcome everyone. This is the ProgCore Fantasy panel. This is my daughter Betty, who will be roaming around a little bit. It's past her bedtime and we're letting her experiment with her life, so say hi, Betty. Yeah, great. So welcome everybody, this is ProgCore Fantasy. Today we're going to be talking a little bit about who we are, the kinds of things that we do, and why it matters to go back and explore the stories of the 70s and the 80s and bring them into modern RPGs. Right now, you're listening to some of the music that we have commissioned for our big project, ProgCore Fantasy into the Dark Age of Fear. We'll be moving past that music in a moment. I'm David Nett, I'm one of the creators of ProgCore Fantasy. We'll talk a little bit about what that is in a second. You can see on the board, so if you begin talking about this, I've got a panel of some of our extraordinary creators and collaborators that have been working on this project with us. I will say, Jason Charles Miller was supposed to be here as well. He got a holler that a couple of songs that he was waiting for feedback on got their feedback this morning, and he's on tight deadline, so he sends his apologies to everyone, but he's making music for other people, which we won't even talk about that. That's right now.
But as long as he's making music.
He is making music. He was very clear that's the only thing that would keep him away from us. So you see him online, he apologized pretty deeply for that. So like I said, I'm David Nett. I'm one of the creators of ProgCore Fantasy. I'm going to go down the line and just briefly introduce everybody. They are worthy all of external introduction, so I'm going to introduce them a little bit. If you guys want to say a little bit anything about yourself or about your connection to the fantasy world as we go, I've got lots of questions for you, so you don't need to. We're going to start right here with Dr. Drea Letamendi, PhD. She is one of our writers on the project. She wrote a story for the ProgCore project. She's in our actual play. She wrote an excursus for the book. An extraordinary psychologist. And what's your role at UCLA, Drea? I don't know your actual title.
Thank you, David.
Yeah.
And thanks for having me here tonight. I work at UCLA, that's my day job, and I serve a role as the director of our psychiatric response team for students who are in mental health crisis.
Next to her is Brian Ward. Brian was the director of our actual play. He's been a constant sounding board for us as we've been moving through the ProgCore project. An extraordinary documentary filmmaker himself, making documentaries, behind-the-scenes documentaries for DVD and Blu-ray releases for Shout Studios, among others. Thank you for being here with us tonight,
It is
Brian.
my absolute pleasure to even be involved with this project. So this is all icing.
Thanks. Next to him is Charity Stashwick. Charity has two stories in our book. She's an overachiever, on top of which is a screenwriter and a novelist. Thanks for being here, Charity.
It's my first panel. Thanks for having me.
First Comic-Con panel.
And I live in the world of fantasy, so, you know.
And at the end is Todd Stashwick. I made a joke about his position in ProgCore at the last panel that we were on, and he didn't hear it, so I'm not going to repeat it.
Well, now I have to hear it.
No, it was just about you being...
It was probably hilarious.
You were the weak link in the ProgCore project.
That's what it is. He does bolster and carry. Hi, everybody. Yes, so this... I'm an actor and a writer in Los Angeles, and but at the very heart of it, I'm just a squishy nerd from the Midwest. Started gaming in '79, and so this project grew out of David and my's love for that era of dark fantasy, and that era of music, and that era of gaming and art and film. It all kind of came from there, and I will throw back to you, David.
Hey team, so I wanted to talk really quickly about what ProgCore Fantasy is. You've got it up on the board over here. ProgCore Fantasy is what we've chosen to call our style of play in the genre of fantasy that we're trying to bring to the fore in role-playing games, collective storytelling, movies, films, and books. So we choose ProgCore Fantasy for our games to enhance the excitement, the butterflies in our stomach sensation we felt when we first picked up the dice. Whether that was 1 year ago or 50, whatever game that we played. And we choose ProgCore when we want to collectively tell stories that feel like classic 70s and 80s fantasy tales without the prejudices inherent to the media of that era. So that's what ProgCore Fantasy, our company, is about. Tonight we're going to talk about that idea of those 70s and 80s stories, why they matter to us, and how we can bring them into our art in a way that allows everyone to share in what was wonderful about them. The beginning of our conversation is going to be about a simple premise, which is why should anyone care about the classic fantasy of the 70s and the 80s? We have thought about this a lot as we're working on our project, so the first question I'm going to throw to all of you is, from that era, this genre of fantasy that we are mining, what stories are worth returning to? What is a favorite story, movie, TV, or books from this era that matter to you, that are worth returning to and exploring, letting go of the things that we don't like and digging into the things that we find wonderful about them? Anybody can jump in first if you want to. We'll start with Todd.
Oh, okay. For me, it's always the gateway drug from 1977, the Rankin and Bass Hobbit. That's what lit the fuse for all of it for me. That was my gateway drug to Tolkien literature, as well as fantasy as a genre, and it landed around the same time as Star Wars. It also was my gateway into Dungeons and Dragons. So when I was listening to the folky songs of the greatest adventure is what life is, like that drew me in, and the art style drew me in, and it was also, which started out very twee, very quickly became very sinister at times, very arcane, and watching a story about a little guy in a little place do tremendous things had a great impact on me. And the same with like Luke Skywalker. He was from a farm and he went on to change things. Later did I realize that Lucas was very much influenced by Tolkien. But it all started there while I was listening to Styx and then playing Dungeons and Dragons. So it all kind of, its apex, its ground zero moment is the Rankin and Bass Hobbit, and then you go from there for me.
What about the rest of y'all?
I think for me it really comes down to the nature of storytelling in the 70s and 80s, and how many different risks and sort of different ways those stories would make themselves accessible to us. So when I think about the stories that I grew up on, I think of course about Secret of NIMH, Last Unicorn, Flight of the Dragons, and kind of these classic animated stories that did take those risks, as Todd's talking about. Characters perished. I was a young child watching these stories that were kind of about, doom and gloom and real adversity. If you can think about it in dark fantasy, right? Real peril, real adversity, willing to take risk around an animated darkness that was accessible for children, not because it was subversive, but because it was teaching us lessons around good and evil, around how we can see ourselves. Like when I think about Secret of NIMH, the protagonist is this little female mom, this little mouse mom, right? And she's amazing. She's flawed, she's protective, she's brave, she makes mistakes, she's like fully, this little mouse is so dynamic. But we see ourselves in these characters, and of course, as a kid I didn't realize, so the villain in Secret of NIMH is actually the National Institute of Mental Health. NIMH stands for National Institute of Mental Health. So for me it kind of like goes full circle, because I ended up working.
And only one person on this panel has actually worked.
Worked for that agency. And then, got defunded and all that, but that's a different story. So I think looking to those stories, there's a sense of, there's just a sense of complexity and willingness to go into the story where, I really cherish that about that era, is kind of the risk-taking, the peril, the willingness to not worry so much about what would the kids think or what would the parents think, because there was an essence of, at the core of it, the importance of talking about bravery in authentic ways through fantasy. And so, yeah, I really embrace that.
I'll say that I came to fantasy literally through pain, which is that around the age of 5, I had I was going out and playing with friends, and we decided to swat at wasps' nests. for fun. We came from North Carolina. And a wasp stung me right here in my eye, and I ran home, and my dad put ice on my face and said, sit down, something just came on TV you're gonna love. And it was also Rankin & Bass's The Hobbit, and when I was done with it, I had forgotten that I had been stung, and my dad said, well, if you love that, you're gonna love the book. And I was like, there's a book! And from that point on, it was all fantasy all the time in our household, that and science fiction. Luckily, throughout a significant portion of my career, I've been able to revisit a lot of those classics. The studio that I work for is a distributor for a lot of like classic things that you grew up on, never quite outgrew. And my job has been to revisit those by making documentaries for them and audio commentaries and talking to the cast and crew of these things. The thing that we just released in December, we remade Deathstalker, which is exactly the kind of movie you're talking about. And we did the ProgCore thing by removing some of the elements that are questionable for 2026. And I couldn't have been more thrilled that that movie turned out the way it did, because it is a beautiful love letter to fantasy.
I'll say really quick, I didn't grow up with a lot of TV or film, for that matter, because my family was in northern Maine. We oftentimes, if we had a TV, it was broken or black and white. So my introduction to fantasy and science fiction was a lot of my own brain, and then my mother was an avid reader, and she would sneak in as much science fiction and fantasy as possible, because it was East Coast. We were supposed to read like legitimate things in my family, some of my family. Her father was an English professor in Pittsburgh, blah, blah, blah. And so she would read Beowulf and Grendel stories and Hobbit. And my sister and I would sit there in the dark, and we would be like, and she would make that voice, and there's a cigarette in the dark, and we would just, our brains would explode with imagination. And, because that's what we had. So I think it was a time in the 70s especially, in the 80s there was a little bit more electronics and everything that started to be born, where everything was so tactile. And all you had was words and paper and your imagination. And so nothing beats your imagination. It's so individual to every person. Your own experiences inform your imagination. So while I could be imagining one thing, my sister could have been imagining a completely other thing, but we were sharing a similar feeling with completely different imaginations. And so that's true today. Even with all the technology, even with all the things that are given to us, our own individual experiences in our lives and make us each uniquely individuals contribute to this imagination that we have. So we can all be seeing the same movie and seeing so many different things at the same time. And it's just an infinite. But in the 70s and 80s, my influence mostly was literary and my own self.
So one of my heroes in short story writing is actually a science fiction fantasy writer named Roger Zelazny. And when he was writing some of his seminal stories in the late 60s, Doors of His Face, Times of His Mouth, Rose for Ecclesiastes, he talked about that this was the last moment it was possible to write these kinds of stories, that the stories that he wrote and wanted to write were so of their era that he was in a hurry. These particular ones were science fiction stories about our ideas of Mars in the 60s or Venus, right? And we knew too much about them, and those stories then couldn't be written thereafter. So much of what we're talking about is so grounded in its time. I guess this is a little bit of a leading question, as will all of these be, since I'm also working on the project. But why is it worth going back to these stories that are of their time and trying to bring them forward? What do we gain from that?
Well, I think it's an interesting thing because it's that everything old is new again idea, where, because we'll just take Dungeons and Dragons as the first tether pulling that forward. Fantasy in the body politic has changed, Right now, I would say Dungeons and Dragons is very influenced by modern anime. It's very influenced by Renaissance Italy, even more. And I think mining this era and sort of putting a blanket around it and calling that era ProgCore allows us to explore something fresh, because it's kind of like Jack White going back to Led Zeppelin and going, what were those riffs that people aren't using right now? How can we discover new things by looking at old things? And then thematically, I think we live in a very nihilistic society, and I think these stories, from Dragon Slayer to Legend to Excalibur, are very hopeful. And I think that's very important, where good triumphs over evil, light outshines the dark, and we wind up with stories that hold us up as opposed to make us more grim, dark, depressed. That's my take.
I think the importance of revisiting the stories and sort of thinking of it, or thinking of them from a more contextual perspective, to kind of add on to what Todd's saying, the climate we live in, the bodies we live in, the experiences we have, that some of those stories weren't for some of us. We just recently watched Fire and Ice, which, if you haven't seen it, it's a collab between Bakshi and Frazetta. I mean, two really amazing artists, and I admit that both of them are true, in my mind, true artists of their era. And when I watch Fire and Ice, I think to myself, this ain't made for me. The male gaze of that film is so present, it's uncomfortable. You can name the talent, name the art, and see it as, such a milestone of its era, and such a capturing of what dark fantasy was. I love it for what it is. And as I watch it through, I think to myself, if I could give some examples if you haven't seen it, the subhumans are brown people. The women are, presented in a certain way where it's sort of clear that it's disempowered. Yes.
And he's kidnapped 3 times.
Right. And
I forgot that. 3 times. Yeah.
Yes. And there's a narrative of just continuous victimization of her in her powerlessness, and the threats introduced to us have elements of racism and homophobia and sexism, and it's glaring, right? And so I think that's an example that first comes to mind for me to deal with the complexity of loving a genre and recognizing that I know that wasn't meant for me. I'm not in the room. And how do I reconcile that now as someone who's a writer, someone who wants to see dark fantasy again, who loves dark fantasy? And I think that's why that evolution and that involvement of more creators and artists in the landscape is really, really important.
Is there worth to be mined in something like Fire and Ice? Is there value in there that you can find to bring into a more modern story?
Absolutely. The sort of tenets of what you're creating with ProgCore, the mystery, the danger, the wonder, mystery, and danger, are absolutely all there. In fact, last night I happened to be. We're at a convention. I was at the bar. And someone sat next to me, and she was talking about fantasy and the stuff that she grew up on, and it was clear we were around the same age. And I was like, oh, well, we're doing this ProgCore fantasy thing where we're basically trying to make role-playing games and just storytelling in general feel like it did when you had the shivers go up and down your spine. You had the orange shag carpet, and you had the wood paneling on your walls of your basement, and all of that. But we're getting rid of the misogyny, the racism, and her face couldn't have lit up more. And at that moment, I then realized, yeah, we're onto something, because this is an opportunity to bring those sword and sorcery stories back without all of the baggage that comes with it.
Really talk about a testimony to the genre. You know, as a woman growing up, loving these things, knowing that I had terrible representation in them, I couldn't get enough of it. I mean, the fantasy element of so many different stories, and I'd glob onto whatever I could that would have representation for me, where, you know, and it was uncomfortable. It was uncomfortable. And you would think it would have drawn me away from it, but I just kept searching because the genre itself of fantasy was so compelling and so incredible and so imaginative. And I was like, I'm gonna come up. Oh, the lady in the lake, there she is. She's strong, she's powerful. Here we go, she's got some of her clothes on. Great, I'm gonna keep reading. And it was, it would get me, you know, again, testament to the genre of how wonderful it is. So that's why it's worth it. It's good, it's goddamn good.
There's not one woman in The Hobbit. Not one. There's not one. But I think, but when you're mining these things, you're mining this arcane darkness, aesthetic, and all the joy of that darkness without making someone not feel welcome at the table.
Brian was the director of our actual play. Drea, Charity, and Todd all wrote stories for our book. As you were sort of mining this era to tell new stories, were there stories or themes or ideas that you carried from that era into your stories? Can you talk about that a little bit? Kind of putting you on the spot. I don't think this was in my notes. But for any of the three of you, or Brian, as you were sitting with the actual play, is there something that you had in mind that you were hoping for?
I'll let the writers do it. I mean, as the director of the actual play, it was more technical than anything else. That looks dramatic, zoom in there. But I think the writers are better.
Well, there's definitely one story that I wrote in the book called The Temple of Selkar-Seir, which I just wanted it to sound like the name of a module from like 81. But I was definitely, like, clearly my biggest influence, I talk about the gateway drug being Rankin and Bass Hobbit, like, and then by extension, Bakshi's Lord of the Rings, and then the Return of the King, Rankin and Bass. That was my tribute to that story, that era, where you have an innocent moving through a dark place and confronting evil. So it definitely was high on my list of things, was trying to capture that spirit when Bilbo confronts the spiders, when Frodo and Sam, where there's a way, when he's there with the orcs. Like, I wanted that vibe, and it very much influenced the writing of that story for me.
I wanted to do something that I couldn't do in real life, which is to use magic as a therapeutic intervention for trauma. So if I could write about that and explore how fantasy storytelling and magic could help us heal in this, you know, clearly in this fictional world, then how would that speak to a lot of the ways in which we deal with our trauma, and a lot of the ways in which, yes, we don't have magic, but we have connections, we have belongingness, we have ways in which we can heal through being with other people. And so that's sort of what I clung on to as far as, I don't know, a trope or sort of like a gimmick that I wanted to play around with. And I write a lot. I'm a psychologist, so I don't have a lot of...
You write a lot, but not a lot of fiction.
Right. I write a lot of nonfiction. And so it was a delight to kind of experiment with, like, well, here's a whole canvas, a whole narrative that I could kind of work with. What would I wish to see? What would I wish to read in a story that's about trauma recovery? And so I kind of played around with that.
Gotcha.
Jared, you've got 2 stories in the book. Were there things that you went back to when you started them?
Oh, hell yeah. I mean, one of them clearly was Gollum influenced, but also...
This is a story called Ralph Luton.
Yeah.
It's actually in the story section of the book. It is the first story.
I guess it is. But it was Gollum influenced, but it was also like, I was like, okay, but what if it was a wizard with PTSD from an experience? Like, my brain just, and then in the middle of it, I was like, what if I did these little vignettes of, like, from the book of Ralph Luton, be these little things that he would say, which was influenced by, of course, I'm reading Dune again, and there's the book of, the Orange Catholic Bible, little, vignettes, or the Bene Gesserits would write these little vignettes and pieces of wisdom, and I'm like, well, what if I pepper in these little pieces of wisdom that Achluthum is making during the story? So there are like 5 different influences of things for that. And then the other story, I grew up in northern Maine on the ocean, and I thought, oh, I know the ocean. I grew up on it, on stormy seas, and what that does, the metaphor for feelings and emotions and what that brings up. So I had a really great time writing about a sea story. And there are also touches of loss and trauma in those as well, because that's all in there too. Yeah. That's all in there too. It's great fun.
One thing that was a big part of the book, and when you're reading it, is how much, especially in the era that we were playing D&D, music was a big deal. We would put on our vinyl LPs, and we would listen to these soundscapes created by Floyd and Yes and Styx, and they scored a lot of our fantasy. So it's almost inextricable. So every time I was writing one of the stories, I'm listening to some classic rock or prog album from the era, because it was intrinsic to who we were and that part of dark fantasy as well. So not just stories from a literary sense or a movie sense, but the stories of like Point of No Return and Ramble On and Wish You Were Here, and those soundscapes as well, which were a big feeling, which is a lot of what we're talking about in our games, is how you feel when you're playing.
So you can get a sense of the vibe that we are going for as we explore this thing called ProgCore. Now, as we talk about it as a collaborative storytelling experience, it's a role-playing game experience, these things that you guys have talked about, the deep feeling in the inner lives of the characters, focusing on story, the triumph of good over evil, the catastrophe that Tolkien talked about, where friendship and love overcomes darkness. Now, as we think about telling these stories collaboratively, how do we convince other people to come play like this?
I think, which is why we were very keen on including in the tenets was the wonder, mystery, and danger. And I think putting parameters, what I love about Tolkien and those stories and a lot of the dark fantasy of the era, it was often simple people encountering a bigger, more complex, stranger, more arcane world. And I think a lot of current Dungeons and Dragons, everybody has powers, everybody's extraordinary, and not to put it down and say it's a bad way to play, but if the question is, how do we shape a game to feel more like this, it needs to feel like a more dangerous world. The wonder that we're encountering in the world has to be more extraordinary than we are as characters, and we learn to interact with this extraordinary world. As Bilbo ran into Beorn, as opposed to playing Beorn. Like, the world is much more wondrous when you're just a little guy from the Shire.
And the Argonauts. Like, just looking up at the Argonauts, seeing and knowing that this came from a history that we don't really know a whole lot about, but...
Mountains in the distance.
But yeah.
Yeah. And so including more wonder, mystery, and danger in your storytelling, you have to strip stuff back, because if your world, if you are this extraordinary, superpowered being, the world that you're encountering can just meet you at eye level. But if we want to not know what's around the corner, we have to pull things back and give parameters to the storytelling so that it takes our breath away as we wander through these worlds.
I think it's an interesting balance. I mean, I want to say there's an accessibility that you want to have, as you want to feel yourself in the story, and that struggle that you can go through and everything, that you can't, it's a fine balance between being too powerful or not being powerful enough and losing all the magic. So you want to feel like you can be in the story, which I feel like...
Willow was a sorcerer.
I mean, we're all in the story. That's the best part about any of this, is that, listen, Ursula K. Le Guin, I was in the Tombs of Tuin while I was reading it, and it was terrifying. So I don't think there's any one way that it should be done. I just think that it's such a wonderful, tactile, accessible experience. This old way of playing, it's that tactile, human experience that we all love to feel in a magical, and then all these magical things come in, and all this wonder and danger comes in, and you're this human being walking through all of it in your imagination. We want to keep all of that.
It's actually really therapeutic, and I think that the ask seems challenging, right? Like, welcoming people to the game, like, come play this game, you might die. You know, like, gosh, that sounds...
Isn't that great?
Right, and it is great. You know, when I think about the students, the clients that I have, that I work with, other people who are like D&D curious, it comes to mind for me that I did start playing tabletop gaming a little bit later in life, and what was clear to me is that the ability for us to really extend and expand our own repertoires around this work is tremendous. You know, I think about, for me, there are three facets of dark fantasy from a mental health perspective that are really critical. One is self-efficacy, the idea that you have some agency in the story. You're not just passively learning like you might in a book, right? So there's some sense of agency. Second is a sense of belongingness, that's especially with this, collective storytelling, that you're at the table, you have a voice, you can do stuff. And then third is self-determination, that actually your actions do matter. Sometimes they matter in ways that impact other people, and that's important to know, and sometimes they matter in tremendous ways where you're really overcoming challenges and adversity. And then, you know, sometimes we roll bad, and it's like, that's the way things go.
No bad rolls, only good story.
Right.
And you're in a safe space, so that if you make mistakes or make bad decisions, your team, shit might happen, but you're supported. And
Well,
that's really
just
cool.
it, right? It's a group effort.
Right.
It's collaborative. So it's not just me in the game, it's we in the game.
I think what I love so much about the wonder, the mystery, the danger is, especially when you're just specifically talking about role-playing games, is the fact that so many games have not just superpowered up their player characters, but you're also expected to equalize between the environment and your players as well. You're balancing it out. So for me, it got to a point where I wasn't necessarily feeling wonder or danger, whereas I might go around the corner and come across something that I had never seen before, which could get me excited, but it didn't make me feel a certain way, because I knew that my DM had created something that was balanced and we could beat it. As opposed to ProgCore, where you are literally wandering through the forest and you hook a left and there's a dragon sleeping and you literally have to go, maybe we should just quietly back up. And that becomes a thing where you know you can't take that on. We're only level 4. We can't do that. And yet you have to be able to negotiate your way out of those scenarios. It's not always, all right, take out your broadsword and do some stuff. It's know the difference between a situation you should be in and a situation you should not. And then roll the dice. And roll the dice.
And walking away from the dragon can be a whole other adventure. So that's what I think people forget. They think, well, then it's going to be boring. Why can't I just fight the dragon? You're like, actually, sometimes not fighting the dragon is the most interesting part. I mean, like when you're doing a story, it's the tenseness up until the thing happens. It's not the thing that's happening. It's how tense it is until you get there. That's the best part of the story.
I realize we keep talking about Tolkien, but let's be honest. He's the reason why a lot of this exists. How many times did Bilbo have to rescue his friends? How many times did Frodo have to get rescued by his friends? Like, these were situations they shouldn't have been in. And they found themselves there. And that's sort of what we want to do in the gameplay as well.
So much of that classic fantasy, whether we're talking about the sword and sorcery, the Tolkien of it all, is about surviving. It's about friendship allowing you to survive for the next thing. We have to cut today's panel a little bit short because there's another panel right after this, which includes most of our panel, in another building way far away. So do we have any questions for our panel? Anybody in the audience that would like to ask a question about ProgCore, something to dig deeper, or any of us in our role-playing game worlds? If not, I've got more stuff too. I just want to make sure that you have an opportunity today, if anybody has anything. Okay, cool. So there's one kind of last place I wanted to dig into here, and this is about the sort of ephemeral nature of collective storytelling. So when we invite people to our tables to experience the wonder and the mystery and the danger of role-playing games together and collective storytelling, how do you think about what you're hoping to walk away with? What is your heart dream when you sit at the table that you're hoping that at the end of the night you can walk away with? I'm going to cheat a little bit here and ask Todd to talk first because he and I talk about this all the time in the context of what we're doing, and let you guys think a little bit about that.
You know, I'm always chasing that feeling of being an 11-year-old. And I say that not just with D&D. I say that with going to movies. I say that with going to concerts. Like, I want to be surprised, I want to be delighted, and I want to walk away wanting more, but being my belly full on what happened at that, and then, oh my gosh, did not expect that, oh my gosh, that was terrifying, oh my gosh, I didn't survive today, all right, I'm gonna roll up another character. I want to constantly. It's what drew me to the game in the first place. It's what drew me to go see Star Wars in the first place, Dragon Slayer in the first place. I want to be surprised, and I want to be delighted. And what's great about collaborative storytelling is there's 7 minds at that table to surprise me. And take things. I'm primarily a dungeon master, so I constantly am loving when my players take the story that way and discover something or a way to do something in a way that I never expected, and then throw something at them that they then use in a completely different way than I could have ever anticipated. I'm an improviser at heart, so stepping out onto the stage for the moment, not knowing where things are going to go, is the thing, is the reason.
But what you were just saying, and I just want to piggyback for a second. You said you were a DM primarily. You've been the DM for the 3 of us during our campaign with the Dregs. Game 1, 2 of our characters died. Game 1. Like, that's what we're doing.
Question?
Yeah, please.
That inspired a line of thinking I've been running with for the last couple of minutes. Obviously, there's a great reverence for what Dungeons & Dragons has done over the last 50 years, especially landing now where we are, where, let's face it, like you stated, every PC is a superhero. You're all storytellers, you're designers, you're writers. What was it like in that playtesting phase? And what were your primary game, not lore inspirations like Lord of the Rings, to figure out the right balance of lethality versus frustratingly not fun?
So it's actually super interesting. So we didn't make a game. ProgCore Fantasy, to be clear, is not a game. It's a play style. And so we very specifically made the choice to not make a new game. There are a bunch of extraordinary game designers out there making really cool stuff. What we wanted to do was to be able to layer over a style of play on top of whatever game you want. So I will say we do have a supplement coming out along with the rest of our things specifically for Dungeons & Dragons 5e, which is basically a compilation of house rules that we use to get these feelings out of 5e, the most played role-playing game in the world. So rather than asking you to play a game that you don't already know or trying to coordinate 6 people to play something different, whatever your game is, the things that are, the tips and tricks that we are creating are about helping you still find these feelings in your game. So mercifully, we didn't have to playtest our own game. However, we have been playtesting rules around 5e for a couple of years now.
It's been a lot of codifying stuff that we already were doing because we both learned how to play this game back in the day. And with all of those influences, so it was already kind of in our marrow, and now getting above that bird's eye and go, oh yeah, here's a way to put that feeling in a way that is pass onable, and go, try this in your game. It might do X, Y, or Z. Try that in your game. It might elicit these feelings. Yeah.